think about a classic car, what comes to mind?
Well, certainly
better?
classic American car is Packard. Packard was well, the three P's, right? There was Packard,
Peerless,
and Pierce Arrow. I would say from about 1908 to about 1918, the Pierce Arrow was the leader. And then they stayed with that old-fashioned T-head engine a little too long. And then Packard, of course, in the teens came out with their V12, which, oh my God, even gave Enzo Ferrari the idea to build a 12-cylinder engine. But Packard hung in there for a long time. This marks both the best and the decline of Packard, this one. Because what, 1936 was their best year, wasn't it?
1936 was their best year ever, and when you think about the fact that it was in the middle of the Depression, many of their competitors had bitten the dust already or were just about to, and Packard had their best sales year because they made the very smart for the time decision to move a bit down market with the 120.
Right.
And that was a great success. They sold 55,000 of them in 1936. But, as you said, it was also the beginning of the end of Packard as one of the premier marques in the world.
Right, and this is a 1936 Super 8 Tourer. Would that be the correct way to say it? Yeah, but you know what's interesting? They did sell a lot of 120s, but at a much smaller profit than they would have made on one of these. So the idea they did a lot more work for the same money, which was not good, and of course it did devalue the name a bit. It's a bit like the name Hemi. It used to mean one engine in particular was a monster, and now it's, or even the word turbo. Yeah, the Porsche Taycan, it's a turbo. Well, it's electric. There's no so it becomes marketing. This, for example, has the chassis of the classic V12 Packard. I have a 32 12-cylinder Packard, which is a magnificent car. So what they did was they just took that heavy chassis, put a smaller motor in it that was a little cheaper to manufacture, and built, which this is a fine car.
It's a very, very fine car.
It's a terrific car. It drives nice. It's powerful. It's fast. It's just missing a little bit of that special something that makes Packard, you know?
Well, Packards are always known for their smoothness, and this certainly is a very smooth engine. This is the last year of this particular 320 cubic inch engine. They went to a newer engine the following year, and it is still something that they were very clever also in the marketing of this particular car, in that they put these very special, it's very interesting today from an engineering standpoint, weighted bumpers that they used on the 12s to add ride smoothness.
Yeah, now, on the outside of the bumper they were filled with oil, and they had and it sort of took out the harmonic imbalance. I got a 1911 Packard, and on that one, for example, my 32 was built on an assembly line in a factory. My 11 was sort of hand built, and it shifted like, yeah, everything clicked. It wasn't fast or anything like that, but it was precise. The steering was very exact, and I knew exactly what he meant. That being said, this shifts and drives wonderful.
And you think about the fact that, you know, your collecting interest is very wide-ranging. My interest in cars is very wide-ranging as well. And what's really interesting to me is the fact that today, all cars are incredibly capable.
Yeah.
From the least expensive on the market to the most expensive.
Right.
It's all very, very small gradations. But back at this period of time, 1936, you could tell the difference between driving a 36 Ford, as capable as that was, and a 36 Packard.
Right. And you also paid hugely for tiny things, you know, a cigarette lighter, you know, a clock, you know, things which we consider just standard on a car now, not so much a cigarette lighter, but a power port, as you call it.
Well, exactly. Today you have to buy a smoker's package.
Right.
And I think they make you sign a waiver at that time.
I think that's right, isn't it? Yeah. Hilarious.
A car like this is very much in its element, driving on Ocean Avenue in Newport. It just sort of feels right at home. The houses are the same houses that it could have driven by in 1936.
Yeah.
And
you know, I almost feel sorry for collectors today, because when I was a teenager, you could buy something like this for $100, maybe a couple of $100. Maybe it wasn't perfect, but you could take it home and get it running. And you know, the nice thing about these kind of cars is parts are mechanical. Mechanical things break. Electronics degrade. So you never quite know. You know, if you found an '89 Taurus, it's going to have a computer in there, and you don't really know why is it running and not running, because
something's going to function until it stops functioning.
Right. Mechanical thing, you hear a crack, oil pressure. Okay, oil pump broke. I got it.
Right.
You know, with electronics, you just don't know. That's what's kind of sad about it. But it was the era where, you know, a high school kid could buy something like this, and if he had the will and determination, could restore it at home and paint it himself and have yourself a beautiful classic that later would be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. You know?
The other shame about it is, Jay, it's about exposure and experience, because you had the chance to try to drive different cars.
Right.
And today, the point of entry for someone who's young who might be very interested in driving a car like this,
right,
is very difficult.
Yeah.
So, you know, certainly, as you were discovering your collecting enthusiasm, you had the opportunity to try lots of things, I think, and that probably leads to the way you collect and your interest in cars, because you got a chance to try a brass era car, to try a steam car, to try a sports racing car, you know? So you got to see what it is that you actually like, what you respond to.
And it bears no resemblance to a modern car. You know, it's funny when you read I know people, they read a period road test and they go, Duesenberg, man, the fastest car there. But they're used to really fast cars of the 21st century.
Right.
And they get something like this and go, why is it so slow? It's not, it really is fast. Just that other cars were really, really slow. I mean, a mile a minute was unobtainable in most cars in the 30s. I mean, they could barely reach 60 miles an hour, but couldn't hold it for more than, 5 minutes or 10 minutes at a time.
Well, that's another very good point, which is the fact that cars like this Packard, and certainly like the Duesenberg, but even this Packard, were designed to achieve speeds that a Ford could make, but not sustain.
Right.
You could drive for 60 miles per hour for an hour in this car and not strain the engine or the mechanics.
That's right, yeah.
And that's the other difference. It's a very funny thing that the theme, such as it is, for this episode, is classicism, and that's why we're driving this this wonderful Packard, emblematic of American classics, especially the 1930s. But everything is very clean and simple, yet beautifully designed.
Right.
You know? And I think that's one of the hallmarks. I think that.
But did it seem clean and simple back in the day? I remember when I had my Model A as a kid, a friend of mine bought a Mustang from the 60s. We were like 16. I opened the hood and I go, oh man, this thing is so complicated. Now I look at a 65 Mustang and go, what could be simpler to work on compared to a modern car? So back in the day, I think this was, I mean, you had 8 cylinders when most cars had 4. Mm-hmm. So you had double the amount of cylinders. They were all in line. It was incredibly smooth. Remember the old thing, they would balance a nickel on the manifold and all these kind of things to show. And that seemed just beyond beyond the pale. But it's very relaxing to drive. It drives right. And this is the perfect road, Most people really traveled at 35 to 40 miles an hour. That was the going speed. You do it today and you just get run over, But it is fun when you get a car like this. You have to drive it in its element. And that's, this is not a super highway car, because you're going to go, whoa, it's a little bit of vibration, it's shaky, and there's too much wind noise. And
how many times have you heard people say, oh, X car drives like a truck?
Right.
Compared to what?
Right.
Compared to other cars in 1936, compared to the driving conditions for which it was built, I think that this is a more than capable car. It's got a nice turn of speed. It responds very quickly to the throttle, obviously.
There used to be a magazine called, what was it, Old Cars or Special Interest Auto.
Special Interest Auto, yes.
And they did something I thought was very clever. They would take an old car and they would compare it to a modern equivalent of that. Right. And it would give you some idea. I remember Ken Purdy was the first to do that in Kings of the Road, and he said a Mercer Raceabout from 1913 drives like a mid-60s MGB, and you go, oh, that's a guy. I know what that drives, how fast that is. So
Right.
that gave me a real sense of what he was talking about. I didn't think of it as 100 miles an hour. But when you're riding, just sitting on a seat that's a wooden board going 60 in a race, about,
That
oh my
gives
God.
you a great impression of speed.
yeah, it really does.
Which is one of the other things. We've had this conversation about the fact that the ride quality of the car consists of so many different components. The suspension, the tires, the seats, the chassis. And, this is also a very comfortable car.
Very comfortable car. And women would give men compliments like, he's a very good driver. And that was a point of pride. My dad used to hear that all the time. He'd take his sisters out and my aunts who didn't drive, and Angela was my dad. Ange is a very good driver. I see my father beam with pride. I mean, nowadays nobody says somebody's a good driver. They're texting and they're eating French fries, and doing all sorts.
If you stay on the road,
Yeah.
you're considered a good driver.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
That Jay, he got me out and got me back. Wow, what a guy.
Well, it is funny because it was an era of, if the car lasted longer than you in terms of endurance, that's an incredible car. People would say he drove it nonstop from New York to Boston. I mean, people would say that with, wow, that's pretty good,
Yeah, you think about the fact that in 1936, the automobile is still a fairly new thing. It's
Right.
40 years old, basically, in its
And half of Americans
form?
had never ridden in one.
So, and we're just past the point, although they're still, putting multiple spare tires on cars in 1936, but we're just past the point where every trip in an automobile is an adventure.
Right.
With multiple tire changes and filling the radiator with water and
Right.
even changing the oil and doing all sorts of things just to get, a few hundred miles covered. So, now we're at central chassis lubrication and all
Right.
these things which must have seemed like the greatest advances anyone can imagine.
And certain phrases have just gone out of style. Sunday driver.
Ah.
I mean, that was a big deal. We lived in a rural area. My dad would say, tomorrow you want to take a Sunday drive? Just to get in the car and go somewhere. It was like a huge deal.
Absolutely.
We go to Richardson's for ice cream over in, what was that, on 125? I couldn't remember where it was. But that was like a big deal to drive a half hour to get an ice cream. Oh my God, it was hilarious.
And I think it's something that certainly those of us who live here in Newport certainly are familiar with, because of course this is a great tourist destination.
Right.
So lots of people out for non-destinational driving,
Yeah.
shall we call it. And I think it's something that, even though it can annoy me if I've got to get to the office or get to the grocery store, I think it's great. The fact that we live in a place where people can just get in their car and drive for the sheer joy of driving.
The other night, I think it was on Amazon, I watched a travelogue from 1952. It was, see the USA, in your Chevrolet. And they were on Ocean Avenue and showing all the houses on Ocean Avenue. And they still look exactly as they look today. It's funny how everything else changes. Yeah, cars change, but everything else stays the same, especially in New England. I remember seeing a picture of the Stanley brothers sitting in their Stanley steamer in 1902 in front of their house in Newton, Massachusetts. And then somebody recreated the photo in the 80s. And same car, and the house looked exactly the same. So the picture was in color, nothing. In California, oh my God, the house would have been torn down. And, I could drive this thing all day. It's a wonderful car, but I realized, we have to go look at the house. What house are we looking at today?
We're going to look at a very, very special house, one which is very emblematic of Newport and very well known. And again, to my theme, because of course we always have to have a theme, no matter how tenuous, of classicism. One of the
now, what is classicism exactly?
Classicism is a look back at essential design elements, usually Roman or Greek.
Oh,
so very clean, very elemental and essential. Not a lot of extra decoration.
Right, I see.
So just as this Packard, to current eyes, it certainly has a lot of Art Deco components to it, but nonetheless, it has become a classic because all of its lines are clean and essential.
Right.
The house we're going to see is called Clarendon Court, and it is a masterpiece of Harold Trumbauer, one of the greatest architects of the Philadelphia era, and someone who contributed terrifically to Newport history.
Yeah.
Let's take a look at an amazing house.
All right, let's go see it.
Here we are at Clarendon Court, an amazing house, one of the masterworks of Horace Trumbauer, Philadelphia architect, of course, who is very well known here in Newport for the house next door, Miramar, as well as the Elms. And this house was built in 1904 for Edward Collins Knight Jr. and his wife Clara. And actually the house was initially named Clarendon Court, after Clara, his wife.
Right.
And the next owner renamed it Clarendon to make it sort of more classical and English. And this house is built on the model of an 18th century English house that was designed but never built at the time. Horace Trumbauer found the design and adapted it for Collins. The neoclassical elegance of Clarendon Court continues from the facade into the entrance hall, with a sensually curving staircase and fine 18th century mantelpieces. The rear loggia is also a typical feature of an English country manor, but here offers a dramatic long view down to the ocean. The house sits on a very special lot on Bellevue Avenue, 7 acres stretching from the street to the water. The placement of the house relatively close to the avenue gives Clarendon an extraordinary stretch of lawn and gardens, unlike most of its neighbors, which are built on the water. The walled garden is a particularly fine touch, with arches that admit the water view while protecting the plantings inside. A very interesting feature of this property, in addition to the 11,000 square foot main house, is a substantial 10,000 square foot carriage house. And it's built on the property near the house, very different from many of the other mansions where the carriage building could be blocks away. For a car lover, it couldn't be more ideal.
I remember this house was in People magazine a million times, not for the architecture, but because of Klaus von Bülow. It was a famous society murder trial of the 80s. It was the biggest one. I can't even think of anything that has rivaled it since. It really dominated the headline. I mean, it's all but forgotten today, but 30 years ago, oh my God, this was the scandal of Newport, wasn't it?
And Newport is a place that's not unknown to scandal, but this was an international event. Klaus von Bülow was accused of putting his wife, Sunny, a wonderful heiress, in fact, who summered here as a child in Newport. Her mother had a house down the road called Champs-Soleil.
Right.
And so she was very well known in Newport circles. And she suffered an insulin overdose. And it was alleged that her husband, Klaus, had deliberately inflicted it on her. He was convicted in the first trial and then acquitted in a second retrial. Now, of course, this house was also famous before the von Bülows, because in 1956, its second owner actually loaned the house to the producers of the movie High Society with Grace Kelly. Now, of course, Grace Kelly, High Society, Sonny von Bülow, and this amazing classical house. Now, let's get back to my theme, classical design. Now, one of the great classics is this great Packard, and the heart of any Packard is the engine. Let's take a look at this wonderful straight-eight engine.
So that's about what, 3 liters, 130 horse, something like that, 3.2, something like that.
Exactly, 320 cubic inches, and it is an absolute marvel. We think about the engineering that Packard still at this point, even though, again, as we stated before, it was sort of the downhill side of the mark, but nonetheless, this is very, very, very impressive.
And you know, the straight-eight was just a marvel of smoothness, vibration-free. 9 main bearings on this, which is pretty amazing. I mean, this was probably the pinnacle of the flathead. It didn't get any better than this. I mean, this basic design lasted all the way literally into the 50s. And they're just wonderfully quiet. Look how accessible the spark plugs are. Look how easy it is to get to everything. I mean, they're wonderful to work on. They're just about bulletproof. And they're all mechanical, with the exception of, there's no electronic ignition, but, you know, points and condenser. Yeah, they're just fabulous, and they run forever and ever. Didn't have modern oil filtration or any of that kind of stuff, but if they did, when you put modern oil filters on these, they will last forever. Just wonderful. Yeah.
And the entire point of something meant to be timeless.
Yeah.
This is an engine that is just as functional today as it was back when it was built.
It didn't have the glamour of the overhead cams or any of that, but it didn't have the noise or the complexity either. So these, I mean, you say how smooth it is. You can't even tell when it's running. Very few modern cars can marvel this for efficiency and quietness and all that kind of stuff. Just beautiful car.
Designed to be clean and effortless. And cleanliness and effortlessness is not exactly, effortlessness is certainly not exactly the hallmark of the next car we're going to look at.
Right.
But in terms of clean lines, it's hard to beat. Let's take a look at our Healey.
Let's do it. This is a 1954 AUSTIN-HEALEY 100, correct?
AUSTIN-HEALEY 100, exactly.
Not an M.
Not an M, from the factory. And it is the purest of the form. And you think about what Donald Healey achieved with this car when it first came out in 1953, a thoroughly modern design for a post-war English sports car, 100 mile per hour performance.
Right.
And you know, basically its only rival was the Jaguar XK120, which cost another $300 or $400 more than one of these. Of course, it's capable of a lot faster speed, but nonetheless.
And of course, this sliding windshield is really what makes this car. It makes it appear so racy and fast and fun. You could put goggles on and put the windshield down on a hot day. Yeah, just a wonderful car. You know, it's so funny. I never got into these because for a few dollars more, why not get the Jag, where you get the twin cam and 120 mile an hour speed. In fact, when I bought my 120, a guy gave me one of these, and I gave it to one of my employees at the garage as a gift because it needed a restoration. He goes, well, I got the 120. What would I do with this? I kind of regret giving it away now, but he likes it, and it's funny. It's not as big as or fast as a Jag, but better and faster than an MG. So it sort of fits in that Chevy, Buick, Oldsmobile, you know, it's kind of right in there, isn't it?
Yeah, the great British sports car ladder of brands.
Right.
And remembering too, again, the relativity of price. When this car was new, the difference of a few $100s between this and the Jaguar was a lot of money.
Right.
So today, as a collector car, it's a totally different thing. It's the choice of the driving experience of the Healey over that of the Jaguar.
And when compared to American cars, I mean, for this same money, you could get the brand new V8 from Chevrolet or General Motors with air conditioning. You could get a real car, my dad would say.
Exactly.
You know, and it seemed like almost like a toy, because this is probably as much as a Buick Roadmaster or something.
Certainly, I mean, $3,000 for a two-seat sports car with no side windows.
Right.
You know, is a considerable
and
amount of money.
4 cylinders.
And 4 cylinders.
Yeah, yeah.
But again, you weren't buying a car in that case that had a direct connection with Le Mans competition as this car has. And again, this is one of those things where the lines are just absolutely classic. If you want to draw a 1950s British sports car, you draw an AUSTIN-HEALEY 100.
And the other thing that's fun is that, you know, it's kind of sad because when you see these cars in period in magazines, the pictures are always black and white. I mean, today every car is refrigerator white or matte gray or black. I mean, this is really a 50s color. It really pops when you see it in person. It really strikes you going down the road. There was just so many wonderful turquoises and all sorts of weird, but colorful, almost like tropical birds, you know. They were fascinating to see.
It's a great analogy, tropical birds. Again, imagine knowing how difficult things still were in post-war Britain. To see a car like this and a color like this, it must have been like seeing, you know, a toucan in the middle of London.
Right, exactly, exactly. I mean, even the matching upholstery and leather here, it's really beautiful. And the folding windshield is really what makes it. With the windshield up, it's just another sports car. With the windshield like this, ooh, it's a race car you can drive on the street, you know. And I imagine you really get that wind in your face and bugs in your face and every other thing in your face in this car, but it doesn't matter. It's drum brakes in the back, and it's what, discs in the front?
This is drums all around.
This drums all around.
Drums
and this
all around.
is based on the Austin 4-cylinder, right?
Exactly.
Basically, not a very sophisticated engine, but lusty, as the English say.
Lusty, and Donald Healey and his gang were also really great at really getting the most out of a basic engine.
Right.
With the way they ported it, the exhaust manifolds, the carburation. They really knew how to get a lot out of what seemed to be very unpromising on paper.
Yeah, a comprehensive dashboard, all the information you need. Is it a it's a 4-speed, which is unusual, most are 3 speeds. And it's got overdrive as well, so.
And that's a funny story too about the 3 speeds. The fact that they were actually 4-speed gearboxes with the first blanked off because it was just a useless gear.
Right,
when
a
you
granny
had
gear.
This, yeah, exactly.
Well, they were truck transmissions, weren't they, basically?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. Can we open the hood and see what the engine looks like?
We could, sure.
Oh, it says 100, and there's got a little plaque here. This car has been fitted with the Le Mans modification kit, making it a 100M, is that correct?
Correct, and this is the dealer installed version as opposed to the factory cars, which had the 100M designation from the factory.
Oh, very good. And I love the fact the generator is almost as big as the engine. And
I think it's a good counterbalance to the SUs on the other side.
even the red fan sort of stands out.
And another great classic.
And of course, my favorite, 1956 Mercedes-Benz 300 SL Gullwing. They never actually called it a Gullwing, did they?
They never called it the Gullwing, no. And it was simply the 300 SL Coupe, or Coupe, as
Right.
it were. And this is a car of remarkable performance. 1955, 150 genuine miles per hour. A car descended directly from the W194 race cars.
You know, it's interesting. They always talk about the Miura, the Lamborghini Miura, as being the first supercar. But to me, this was the first true supercar because most fast cars were not dependable. They would tell you, do not sit at a stoplight, do not let the plugs load up, it'll, you know, take it out, give the Italian tune-up, that kind of thing, not to be driven daily. Whereas this is a supercar you could drive daily, had weather protection, although these windows, you had to take them out physically and put them in a leather bag that went in the back somewhere.
But again, a legacy of its descent from a racing car.
Right, right.
And the fact that, you know, today manufacturers use gullwing and scissor doors for all sorts of effects. The fact that these gullwing doors, as everyone knows, are very practical because of the build of the tubular frame upon which the car is based. And the fact that Mercedes, with the predecessor of this car, basically from the ruins of World War II,
Right.
came out and dominated sports car racing 10 years after their factories were rubble.
And the first production car with fuel injection, isn't it?
Direct mechanical fuel injection in a
Right.
gasoline car.
I mean, this is what then inspired the Corvette to have fuel injection a few years later, and a few other manufacturers. Well, General Motors had it in a few cars, not with great success.
No one did it as well as Mercedes did in the
No.
1950s because, again, it was something that was thoroughly engineered for a performance standpoint. The cars had to be reliable for distance races like Le Mans and the Carrera Panamericana and the Mille Miglia. I mean, great races where you had to run at top speed
Right.
for hours at a time.
And it's interesting that this has the Rudge wheels, were considered the wheels to have, yet they are heavier than the standard wheel. So I never understood why racers like these. Maybe it was the knockoff factor.
It was
whatever.
it was a center lock wheel, which again made for easy and quick wheel changes as opposed
Right.
to doing all the individual bolts. Now, one of the things about this particular car is the fact that it comes from the Nick Begovich collection
Right.
to the Audrain. And that is an amazing collection of cars which the Audrain collections were thrilled to acquire, of a brilliant engineer, an electrical engineer who was the head of Hughes Aircraft and Litton Data Systems, did a lot with the development of radar systems and missile guidance and torpedo guidance. An absolutely brilliant man who collected amazing cars, and this is one of them.
Yeah, I mean, I knew Nick at age 98. I remember talking to him, and he was trying to get a car ready for a Picasso for Pebble Beach. He said, I'm not sure I'll have it finished in time. You know, he's 98 years old, you know. And yet he bought all these cars, new or near new, back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
His Lamborghini Miura had 900 miles. He had a 904 Porsche, the most original one ever.
On the planet.
On the planet. In fact, Porsche came to him to photograph his car to see exactly how it was put together because he loved originality.
He loved originality. He also, though, liked to personalize his cars in some ways because, of course, he was an engineer. He couldn't resist the urge to
Right.
tinker. He had a spectacular machine shop. And so you'll see on this car little details like the exhaust tip was made by him in his shop. He replaced the
custom wheel.
Exactly. He replaced the original big plastic Mercedes wheel with this beautiful wood Nardi wheel. And also this car has been repainted. It's not the original Mercedes white, 050 I believe it's called, which is the refrigerator white. It's a much softer white, and in very typical 1970s California custom style, the wheels are a slightly creamier color.
Right.
And then that creamier color is also carried on the fenders and fades out to the color of the car at each of the wheel openings.
Yeah, interesting.
And the pinstriping on the fender lips and on the wheels. You know, again, a very personal statement. Then he made Lucas headlights.
Yeah, interesting. He was a funny guy. You know, he came to see my collection in age 98 before he sold me anything. He wanted to make sure that we'd go to a good home and wanted to see where the car would be parked. You know, it just made me laugh. You know, all right, which is exactly what I would do. So it's the same thing. It's the same thing.
And you know, in keeping in the theme, because you know we always have to have a theme, and I force it through no matter how difficult it might be to see.
Yes, you don't have to tell me.
This is certainly, by any stretch of the imagination, one of the absolute classics of the mid-century automobile.
Right.
This is a car that everything on it is essential. There's nothing here for pure decoration or for excess. The side grille vents to extract the heat from the body, the gullwing doors, the practical purposes we discussed before, and the seats that are very comfortable but basic seats, sort of the most comfortable you can make a racing seat. And the classic nature of this car is also even in what we're wearing. I mean, what could be more classic for Newport in the spring than a beautiful green plaid shirt?
I had no idea. Yeah.
And of course, I'm in the classic khaki pants, blue blazer, rep stripe tie, a classic watch. I mean, it's just
and
everything.
the Willy Loman hat, certainly from the
salesman is not
salesman.
yet dead.
That's also the same hat Enzo the Baker wore in the opening of Godfather. Godfather, my daughter is attacked by 3 men. You mustn't do that. Am I holding the hat? That's the same hat. So you have that Enzo the Baker look. Yeah, very good. Very good.
And you see, one of the other things that these 3 cars have in common, as well as this wonderful classical house, the fact that I can wear my hat inside.
You can wear your hat inside. Well, let's open the hood and show them that fabulous engine.
Absolutely.
And the engine tilted on its side to get lower frontal area, which is something they did in the 50s. Jaguar did it with the C and D type.
Lancia did it as well.
Yeah.
And it's a big challenge as well to bring one of these cars back to vibrant life for the road, as we will see in a few moments, and yet retain all of the originality that it had. It was a real challenge for Mark Allen and his team up at Rare Drive in Vermont to do this, and they did a spectacular job because everything here is absolutely as it should be for a high-performance car, and yet nothing looks like it's been renewed.
No, just fantastic. Well, let's take it for a ride.
Okay, it's a deal. One of the facts they always talk about with a 300 SL Gullwing is the fact that people prefer the Roadsters because of all the airflow.
Right.
But I think that actually, I'm just going to prove it now, opening up the air to vents with the side windows removed and the vents open with the belly pan, this car is perfectly comfortable.
Oh, it is very comfortable, and it's the first comfortable high-speed sports car. Well, Aston Martin too, to a certain extent.
Yeah, but the Astons of this period, I think, are not as comfortable as the Mercedes.
No.
And we were talking in the Packard about the combination of suspension, tires, chassis, and seats.
Right.
This is as comfortable in its way as the Packard.
Right.
And we're in a high-performance car, probably the highest performance car for the street you could buy in the mid-1950s. And yet, here we are sort of burbling through Newport.
When I worked at Foreign Motors in Boston, we took one in for $5,500 and sold it 2 weeks later for $7,500. And my boss was like, and he thought, well, no one will ever make as much profit in a used car. Well, that was 69, 70, 71. So that was a huge
Oh my God, yes.
That was a huge profit.
That profit was the price of a Volkswagen, a new Volkswagen.
Yeah,
I mean,
and people forget this is the beginning of an era when a used car or an old car or a classic, whatever you want to call it, would cost more than a new car.
right.
My dad would always say, when I would point out some classic of Mercer race, you get a new Cadillac for that. Why would you buy that? But if you go up in an era when the automobile was purely functional, a better functioning one should be worth more than one that doesn't function as well.
And we still see that today, Jay. I mean, look at the incredible proliferation of high-performance sports and GT cars.
Right.
You have the latest X, whether it's a Mercedes, Porsche, Aston Martin, McLaren, and then 18 months later, one comes out with that much more performance or that much more technology.
Or they take the air conditioning, the radio, sound deadening out, and charge you more. And it's more uncomfortable, and maybe it's a little faster if you can tell hundredths of a second in your mind.
Exactly.
You know? I mean, the classic example of that, the Porsche Speedster. The Speedster was the cheapest model because it had nothing.
Exactly.
And then because it was considered fast, you know, what, 60 horsepower versus, you know.
And, you know, it's funny that you bring up the Speedster as we are riding in this Gullwing because, of course, both of them were the brainchild of the great Max Hoffman.
Right.
Who really knew quite a bit about both product design and marketing.
Right.
Because he knew what Americans wanted in sports cars in the 1950s. And arguably, Porsche and Mercedes would not have become what they did if it weren't for Max Hoffman really putting them on the map in the U.S. and then around the world.
Well, I could also put Tesla in that equation because when it came out, the dual motor Tesla Model S was the fastest four-door sedan in the world, 0 to 60. And I bought it purely for that reason. The fact that it is environmentally sound, well, that's good, isn't it? And, you know, economical, well, that's good. But those are all, it was second only to performance. And this is a wonderful car to drive swiftly. It's a little scary to drive fast because with that swing axle, it can tuck under on you, a little tricky. But amazing, just an amazing. It's amazing how planted it feels and how of solid billet it feels.
The modernity of this car is astonishing.
Yeah.
And it's something that, to your point about the swing axles, can catch a lot of people who are not really classic car people out because the car will accelerate like any modern car, will handle like any modern car up to a point.
Right.
And at that point, then you have to remember when this car was engineered and built.
Right.
Respect it, then I think that a ride in this at 80, 90, 100 miles per hour is a thrill that I can't get in a 2020 car driving at that speed.
Right. Like the Lamborghini Miura, it's fun. It's more fun to drive as a classic than as a new car. Because a new car, you're putting standards of handling and braking that, whereas with this, you have a certain reverence for it, so you drive it as fast as sanely possible.
Right.
As to driving it insanely, if that makes any sense.
Sure, no, absolutely. We're not going to take this car to its limits the way the original owner might have back in the 1950s. Imagine, driving this car in Nevada or Montana where there were no speed limits when this car was built. That would have been a totally different experience altogether. Plus, I know that you love the mechanical. And one of the other things I love about this car is the fact that it sounds mechanical.
Right.
It's a discussion that you and I have about electric cars. I do respect and admire the incredible performance of electric cars, but I need a soundtrack.
Right, I get you.
And that's a soundtrack.
But people drove these cars when 60 miles an hour was fast.
Yeah.
I have a 57 Imperial, and when I drive it at 65 miles an hour, it feels perfect. When I drive it at 75, hey, it just feels like it's a little too fast,
All hell is about to break loose right over there. It's an interesting conversation too that has started about the conversion of classics to electric power.
Right.
And I've had some conversations on that, and my thought is, if the engine, the characteristics and the quality of the engine, the sound of the engine, the feel of it, is integral to your enjoyment of the car itself, I can't imagine making an electric conversion. I can't imagine an electric Gullwing. But if you're driving a 66 Cadillac Coupe de Ville, you can put an electric motor in it. I think it'd be sensational.
I tell you, I drove a 911 with a Tesla motor conversion.
Uh-huh.
And if you want to win races, either handling and performance, that's the engine you're going to put in it.
But
I
you're
mean,
missing
it
that
was
essential
so
Porsche sound.
I mean, it was so fast. Well, like I say, racers, it's why old race cars are hard to find, because they keep updating them. You know, their goal is to win races.
Right.
And with that Porsche 911, I was astounded. It actually handled better because the motor was here. It was
Right, better weight balance.
sort of mid-engine, no transmission, so there's no delay, and you all through the power band, it just keeps pulling and pulling. I mean, I nailed it at 60 and chirped the tires. And it was like, oh my God, I was astounded how fast it was.
This is a car that, to me, it as the Brits say, you know, it ticks all the boxes. It's great looking, it's comfortable, it's fast. And you know, you don't worry about driving a car like this that, oh my gosh, I'm going to do something and something's going to break, because it's just built so solid. It's a Mercedes. You know?
Do you know how they came up with the 65-mile-an-hour speed limit for the highways? Back in the 50s, when they built the highway system, they would take ordinary people out in cars and they'd throw a towel over the dashboard, and then they'd go faster and faster. Tell me when you start to get uncomfortable. And above 65, people would go, boy, that feels about right. And it was always between 60 and 70 miles an hour.
Interesting.
Yeah, and interesting, because when you drive a car from the 50s, 60 seems perfect.
It's about the limit.
70 seems a little floaty, you know, bias ply tires and all of that. And it does seem that way.
Which is so funny and so ironic, because it's fairly well known that most of the interstate highway system was built basically for 100 mile per hour travel.
Right.
But obviously not for everybody. And it's another interesting thing about driving fast. And a car like this rewards. We were talking about in the Packard that it would not be a comfortable highway car. One of the great things about a 300 SL is the fact that you can drive it on twisty roads and be very entertained, 2-lane roads like we're doing right now, or you can take it on the highway.
Right.
It's a perfect highway cruiser. You keep up, not only keep up with modern traffic, you can pass a lot of modern traffic in a car like this.
And in the winter, it's very cozy.
Yes.
You know, I love to take mine out on a 40-degree day in Los Angeles. You close everything up, you get that engine heat, and you're hearing the noises, and it's not blowing your hair, and you're not getting hit in the face with bugs. It's a fabulous car to drive.
This car never blows my hair.
Right, exactly.
And you can wear a hat inside.
You can wear the Enzo the Baker hat from The Godfather.
How many ultra high performance sports cars can you wear a hat in?
Right.
Try this in your McLaren. Won't work.
And of the 3 men in America who wear hats, you're 33 1/3% of them.
But I can say that a third of all bow tie wearing, hat wearing men in America completely support the idea of having a Gullwing.
You could have been president of Chrysler. You know that story, right?
Yes.
Yeah, what was his name? Kemper?
Kemper, yes.
Kemper. He would not allow them to build a car that he could not wear his hat while driving. So Chryslers of the 50s were just high roof, and they looked sort of old-fashioned when everything else was low and sleek. And then when he was replaced, Virgil Exner came in with a forward look, and suddenly hat wearing was out the window. In fact,
Suddenly it was 1960.
Suddenly it was 1960. I've got a great thing at home, a book on accessories for your car. And one is a wire thing that fits in here. So when you get in your car and you go like this, the wire grips the top of your hat and holds it just a 1/4 of an inch off your head so air blows underneath. But when people see you driving, you have your hat on.
I want one of those, Jay.
Oh, it's a great thing.
My next birthday, I expect to see one coming from you.
It's a great goofball item. You get in, you go like this, and
now your hat is...
You should never have... Are you sure you didn't read that in Mad magazine?
No, it's a real thing. Isn't that hilarious?
That is fantastic. I want one.
Then I had a cigarette lighter where you take each cigarette, you put the pack in, and you press the button.
And the lit cigarette
It
came
lit
out
cigarette,
of the
and it
dispenser.
flips it up, and the guy in the air goes like this. He catches it like this. And the girl is like, oh my God, she's so impressed, you know.
You're a good driver.
But yeah, that's right. But it's hilarious. I mean, this actually corner is very nice.
It corners amazingly. This car is just fabulous.
Well, I enjoy any car I can enjoy seeing the tack sweep across. You know, modern cars, you step on it and hey, I'm in jail. What I do? Why am I being arrested? You don't even have a chance to enjoy it. Whereas this thing, you put your foot in, you watch the tack sweep across to 6,000, and then you shift.
And it's also rewarding. I mean,
Yeah.
when you rev this car, it makes a great sound and moves forward, as opposed to cars that make lots of noise and don't do much for you.
Right. What am I saying, Donald? You picked a great house today. I've gone by that a million times, and I always thought, well, it's too close to the road, and it's kind of blocky looking, but like a car, when you open the hood and see a fascinating engine, much to be revealed once you open that door.
Absolutely. And I think the three cars that we picked, and especially this 300 SL, absolutely epitomize everything that Clarendon Court is.
Right.
Classic, quiet, but when you get inside, it's astonishing.
Now, once again, clarify the tenuous connection between the theme and the cars we found again.
Jay, they all epitomize a classic, understated sense of style, but deliver so much more than you would think when you first look at them.
Much like myself.
Yes.
Always fun to see Donald stump for words.
A classic, Mr. Leno. A classic.